Romans ruled Britain for nearly 400 years. They'd brought with them all sorts of revolutionary new concepts, from the hot bath to the hamburger. In this programme, I'm going to look at some of their wackier technology, like the first robot and the slot machine, inventions that were literally centuries ahead of their time. As the Romans changed the landscape and culture of Britain, the people had to accept a new style of government. And the occupying forces had some effective and non-violent ways to keep the Britons subdued. Throughout the empire, the Romans found that a good way to keep the people quiet was to give them loads of food and entertainment. In their words, panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The Latin word circus actually means a racetrack for horses. But what we see in a modern big top would have been familiar to citizens of the Roman Empire. And they had ample opportunity for entertainment, especially those living in Rome. In the mid-4th century, an incredible 175 days every year were public holidays. So what on earth did the average Roman do? Well, one way they filled in their time was by going to the well-organised and free entertainments. We know from Roman writers that much of the entertainment was staged in the street, with tightrope walkers teetering above the heads of the crowd. The Romans considered all entertainment civilizing, even violent displays. So every Roman city had an amphitheatre. Here at Caerleon in South Wales, reenactors staged some of the spectacles that were common in Roman times. Today, only the stone foundations of the amphitheatre survive. These would have supported rows of wooden seats. The oval central area was covered with sand, harina in Latin, from which we get our word arena. Most of the year, this amphitheatre was used for training soldiers, but on public holidays it was transformed into a theatre. At the top of the bill were the gladiators. In the violent world of gladiators, religion was very important, and the Romans worshipped many gods. Before he went out to meet his fate, each gladiator would have come into a little room like this to pay his respects to a shrine. This one was to Nemesis, the goddess of fate and divine retribution. One of the rituals of Roman worship was cleansing. Amazingly, there's evidence in the texts for a coin-operated water dispenser. It could have been the world's first slot machine. Just look at this. With the top off, you can see how it works. The coin runs down the chute, drops onto the pan, and its weight tilts the lever and lifts the flap to dispense the holy water. Now, this is it. In for a denarius, in for a librum. Out here in the arena, the gladiator would have had to be ready to meet his foe. either another gladiator or a wild beast. The Romans really did have loads of these automata. In fact, Hero of Alexandria boasted of an automatic theatre which rolled on, the curtains opened, and the characters performed the complete show, all without human intervention. Come and have a look and see how this one works. Here are the wheels, and you'll see that round the axle is wrapped a piece of string. And the string comes up here, over 2 pulleys, and is tied to this great heavy weight, which is resting on a pile of sand. Now the sand's on a platform here, and underneath there's a flap. Now all I have to do is to pull the string, the sand will come flooding out, and the automaton will zoom forward. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, pull! As the weight falls, it unwinds the string and turns the axle. By the end of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was coming under attack. To help defend it, troops were withdrawn from Britain, which left the country vulnerable to invasion from a new foe, the Saxons. The Saxons came in boats like these, lots of oars, and look, a flat bottom, no keel, so they could sneak up the rivers and estuaries and attack far inland where there were no defences. The Roman response was to construct the first ever consolidated defence network, a chain of forts around Britain's southeast corner. The chain stretched from East Anglia to the Solent, and because of the chief enemy, they became known as the Saxon shore forts. Just across the water from Portsmouth, this is one of the best preserved of the Saxon shore forts, at Porchester. This would have provided a safe anchorage for the Roman fleet, a base for the troops, and a wonderful lookout post to watch for invaders. Of course, it would have looked very different in Roman times. For a start, the church wouldn't have been there. For another thing, they laid it out in their standard pattern for an army camp. So there would have been a road up there where it still is, and another one running from side to side the other way. All the buildings were wooden, laid out in a grid pattern between the roads, with the barracks and the bathhouse and all that sort of thing. The buildings have long gone, but the walls are still there. Indeed, they were used for more than 1,000 years after the Romans left, which is an incredible tribute, both to the skill of the Roman engineers and to the material they used, concrete. Concrete underpinned the architectural achievements of the Roman Empire. They used it to build many of their most lasting public buildings, from aqueducts to the Colosseum. Someone who's spent a long time studying Roman concrete is Tony Rook. Now, Tony, you reckon all this stuff is Roman?
This is Roman up to about here somewhere. And then above that, it's all bodged and patched, and all sorts of things have happened to it over the years.
Right, but these bottom bits definitely Roman.
Bottom bits are definitely Roman.
So where did they get all the chalk and the flint from?
Well, luckily, of course, they use local material. Luckily, just across the way here, just across the other side of the other side of the water, we actually have, you can still see across there, a great big chalk pit.
Yes.
And the flints occur actually in the chalk, inlined in the chalk.
The flints are like bricks held together by lime mortar. Together they form a type of concrete which sets very slowly. This type of material was used for most of the Romans' defensive walls. Now, Tony, you ready to go?
Yep.
Right, so how did they make the walls here?
Well, they started off with the chalk, the local limestone. Right?
Okay.
If you take that and you heat it in the kiln until it's red hot,
Yeah.
it loses a lot of weight,
Yes.
and it becomes what's called quicklime.
Okay.
It's called quick because it's very reactive.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, it looks exactly the same, but
Right.
we've got the specimen here which has been crushed,
Okay.
and if we take that and we add water to it, you'll see what happens.
Okay, so it's one shovelful.
Well, let's put a couple of
Okay,
shovels.
you're
Let's
on.
be
Okay,
generous.
how much water?
Oh, enough to make it just look wet at the
Okay.
moment. is now boiling. You can see that, look?
Yes.
It's actually boiling, there's steam coming off it. And what's happening is that the weight which was lost, which was carbon dioxide, is now being replaced with water. And that is the stuff that the Romans used to mix with sand. You mix that with sand, and that produces your mortar.
Right, so this is now slaked lime.
That's now slaked lime, hydrated lime. It's now a lime mortar. It's a bit wet, actually, isn't it? What they used to do was to take one part of that
Right.
to 3 parts of sand.
So if I take 3, so that would make the sort of mortar they've used here.
The sort of mortar.
And shall I start mixing it?
Oh yes, please do. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Lime mortar was widely used with flint or other rocks, but the Romans came up with another ingredient that turned it into quick-setting concrete.
what the Romans discovered was that they had a volcanic ash, which came from Puteoli,
Right.
which is north of Naples.
Yep.
There are other places it comes from, and that's some of the stuff.
This stuff?
there. Yes. Then you get a mixture which will set all by itself, and it'll even set underwater.
In fact, water is a vital part of the chemical reaction which turns this into a solid. So we're going to fill this mould you've made.
Yeah, we haven't got enough there to fill it up, but
No, but we can start.
For a start, there you are.
And then we can make a triumphal arch.
We hope. Yeah.
So, by adding volcanic ash, the Romans had hit upon the secret of fast-setting concrete, which, like its modern equivalent, also sets underwater. One of the reasons why Roman buildings have lasted so long is that the Romans were brilliant structural engineers, and one of the great structures that they almost certainly brought to Britain was the arch. Just look at this one here. Up at the top, there are 7 stones there, just hanging in space. The only reason they don't fall down is that each one is shaped like a wedge, wider at the top than the bottom, and it can't fall through its hole. This is a later arch, but constructed the same way. Earlier, the Greeks spanned spaces with flat beams or lintels. The problem with lintels is that they aren't very strong. Using an arch like this automatically spreads the load from the centre to the walls, and that means that the arch is inherently stronger. The Romans used arches to great effect in many of their buildings. The Colosseum in Rome used lightweight concrete arches. And in the Pantheon, they took the technique a stage further to create a huge concrete dome, the largest dome in the world, before the 20th century. Porchester and the other Saxon shore forts laid the foundations for nearly 100 years of peace in Britain. But the restlessness across the Channel began to stretch the resources of the Roman army. By the end of the 4th century, the Roman Empire was in real trouble. All around the frontiers, their enemies were attacking them viciously. And the real trouble was the Romans failed to innovate. During the early period of the inhabitation of Britain, their engineering and their technology was absolutely brilliant, but they failed to make any advance in the next few hundred years, and as a result, they were being outmaneuvered all over the place. There was one man who thought that the empire could in fact be saved by developing new technology, and he wrote a letter about it to the emperor. It's called De Rebus Bellicis, which is normally translated of military matters. He seems to have invented brand new instruments of war, which are really intriguing. Now, the first of these is putting scythes on the chariot wheels. So you have a chariot, you have great scythe blades on the wheels, and as you go forward, the blades turn around and you simply mow down all the opposing infantry. It sounds pretty vicious, doesn't it? Perhaps my favourite of his inventions, though, was the thing that he said was absolutely essential for armies who needed to cross rivers or boggy country, and this was the portable, inflatable bridge. The book describes animal skin floats lashed together. There's no evidence that any of these inventions was ever made, but I wanted to give the inflatable bridge a go. First job is to find some animal skins. In East Anglia, David Marshall makes bagpipes in the traditional way, using airtight animal skin bags. He starts with Nigerian goat skins, which are a byproduct of their meat industry. He and his wife Valerie block up all the holes in the skin. He then pours in bagpipe sealant, made of soap, oil, animal glue and gelatin, all of which the Romans had access to. Inflating the bag forces the sealant into all the tiny holes and blocks them, making a leather float perfect for building an inflatable bridge. The only problem is that it's going to take a lot of goats to get across a small river. I couldn't get hold of 150 goats anyway, which is what I reckon I'd need to get across here, so I thought it would be better to use one of these, an inflatable toy, which, curiously, turns out to be almost exactly the same size as a goat skin, so it seems a perfectly reasonable substitution. Luckily, I've also got hold of Gareth, who's got a lot of experience with inflatable craft and so on, and he's going to help me to blow them up and construct the bridge. Now, Gareth, shall we do a bit of inflating? The man in the book specified that he held his animal skins together with hooks and eyes like this, and that both held them rigid and also stopped them rotating. Well, I agree that that's a very sensible way to do it, but I reckon that the modern equivalent of the hook and eye is gaffer tape. That should do it, and we're getting on. In the book, he recommends covering the bridge with a layer of goatskin mat, basically because otherwise it would be very slippery. And this wet plastic is going to be pretty slippery. Also, I want to be quite sure I'm spreading the load. So I'm going to put some carpet down, and then I should be able to cross. It's a very bizarre feeling. It's swaying a bit sideways. It's easily supporting my weight. That's not a problem. I'm not getting down to the water level here. Buoyancy is good. I find it hard to imagine the entire Roman army marching across here with loaded packs. Terrific! I'm there! An inflatable bridge. We've crossed the raging torrent. Clearly it's possible, although whether it really would have been useful for an army, well, I'll leave that to the experts to decide. The Romans may never have made an inflatable bridge, but the idea does seem to have been sound. In fact, so sound, we have reinvented something similar, which is in use today. You look a little bit wobbly there. Tell me, what are these things used for?
Well, they're used by the emergency services for rescuing people who have fallen through frozen ponds, like this one would be in the winter.
Right, but not by the army.
Not at the moment, no. They are looking at it, but it's only used by fire brigades at the moment.
Right. So did you know that this was a Roman invention?
No, we didn't actually. No, it was quite a surprise to us when we learnt that they were using this kind of concept then.
So now you can go back to this one?
No, I don't think so. I think we'll stick with what we got there.
Anyway, it's wonderful. This is something else we have to thank the Romans for. Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, the inflatable bridge was a lot of fun, but actually, given the choice, I think I'd rather have a boat. And so probably with the Romans, because even though they were great engineers, on the whole they preferred tried and tested technology. Their best ideas were stolen from the Greeks, but they made them work really efficiently. In the end, the empire simply got too big. The empire was simply unable to adapt to the changing circumstances, especially when the enemies were battering at their gates. And so they gradually withdrew their troops from places like Britain, never to return. But as the administrators and the military left, a lot of the technical skills gradually faded away. However, the bleakness of the Dark Ages that followed couldn't obliterate all the achievements of the Romans in Britain. You know, we've still got rectangular houses, concrete, a road network, hamburgers, three-course meals, flushing lavatories, spas, mass entertainment.
What made ape man human? Was it a change of diet? The prehistory season continues, tracing our evolution next on UK TV History.
That's set really well. The water doesn't seem to have bothered it at all.